I didn't plan on stopping by my husband's office that afternoon. My schedule was already stacked. Supplier calls, a design meeting for the fitness line, and a lunch with investors at the Rosewood. But something inside me, that quiet little instinct that always wakes up when a storm is about to roll in, tugged at me. Go upstairs. Go see him. So I did. The 27th floor of Helios Dynamics always had a bite to its air conditioning. It smelled of glass cleaner and ambition, of endless meetings where men in suits pretended to be gods. I pushed open the glass door to the conference wing, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. And that's when I saw it. Noah Mercer, my husband of 12 years, the boy who once swore he'd build the world for me, the man I had stood beside through the grind of building a company, had his arms locked around Kayla Lynn, his secretary. Their bodies were pressed together against the glass wall of a conference room, and he was kissing her like she was oxygen. His hand cupped the back of her head. Her fingers curled into his tie. Her mouth parted eagerly under his. It was obscene. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I didn't even bang on the glass like some desperate wife in a bad soap opera. Instead, my chest went still. Pulled. Detached. Like my emotions had already filed the paperwork for a divorce before my brain caught up. I stood there long enough for him to notice me if he'd bothered to turn his head. Long enough to watch his hand travel lower. Long enough to know there was no mistaking this for an accident. Finally, I stepped back, the sharp rhythm of my heels echoing like the ticking of a countdown. By the time I reached the elevator, my phone was already in my hand. I dialed Marcus Lee, the head of our board's ethics committee. He picked up on the second ring. Ava. His voice was wary, like he knew no good ever came from me calling unannounced. Marcus, I said evenly, I'd like to report a violation of workplace conduct. It involves the CEO. Pause. A sharp inhale. Noah? Yes. I glanced back through the glass wall as the elevator doors slid shut. He was kissing his secretary. In a Helios conference room. During work hours. On camera. There was silence. Then Marcus said, "Send me the details. Already in your inbox." Because I wasn't stupid. I had already lifted my phone, snapped 3 crystal-clear photos and attached them to an email. Difference. That night, the mansion didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stage where the final act of a tragedy was playing out. I ordered the staff to pack Noah's things. His tailored suits, his imported cufflinks, his golf clubs, neatly folded and boxed by the door. I had the locks changed. By the time Noah stumbled back close to midnight, everything was waiting for him in the driveway. He pounded on the door, his voice booming. Ava. What the hell is this? Open the damn door. I stood inside the foyer, a silk robe draped over my shoulders, a glass of wine in my hand. Come. Almost serene. Your things are outside, I said, voice just loud enough to carry. Take them and go. Don't wake the neighbors. His fist slammed harder. You think you can humiliate me like this? I swirled my wine lazily. Oh darling. You managed that all on your own. I made another call before bed. This time to Louise Tran, head of HR. She sounded nervous when she picked up. Louise, it's Ava, I said. Effective immediately, Kayla Lynn has 2 choices. Resign voluntarily or be terminated for cause. Louise stammered. And the official reason? Passive aggression. Unprofessional conduct. Workplace misconduct. I smiled faintly at the ceiling. She'll know which box to tick. Yes, Ms. Hart. Good. Then before I hung up I added, and Louise, don't call me Mrs. Mercer again. At 12:15 a.m. my phone buzzed again. Noah's name lit up the screen. I let it ring until it died, then poured myself another drink. When he called again I finally pressed accept. Ava Hart. He spat my maiden name like it was acid. I've never met a woman as vicious as you. I'm divorcing you. I gasped dramatically into the receiver, pitching my voice into mock hurt. Oh no, Noah. I'm so scared. Please don't leave me. Then my tone snapped like a whip. Make sure you keep your word. And whoever caves first is a dog. The line went silent. Then his roar. Tomorrow. Carter and Sloan. Bring your lawyer. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was as if a fog had lifted, and for the first time in forever, I could breathe without the weight of Noah Mercer pressing on my chest. I didn't cry into my pillow. I didn't mourn the man I used to know. That man had died the second he shoved his tongue down his secretary's throat in a conference room with glass walls. Noah wanted a divorce? Fine. He would get one. But on my terms. I dressed with precision. A white tailored suit, because white wasn't innocence, not on me. On me white was armor. It said, untouchable, pristine, radiant. My hair was pulled into a sleek knot, every strand pinned as sharply as the knives I intended to twist today. I chose scarlet lipstick because it was a declaration of war. When I arrived at Carter and Sloan, I didn't slink in like a discarded wife. I strode into that glass and steel lobby like a woman who had already won. My heels clicked on the marble floor, crisp and deliberate, drawing eyes as I passed. People didn't look at me with pity. They looked at me with awe and maybe a little fear. The receptionist's smile wavered when she announced me. Ms. Hart, Mr. Mercer and his counsel are waiting for you in conference room 3. Ms. Hart. Not Mrs. Mercer. The sound rolled through me like champagne bubbles. I pushed open the door. And there he was. Noah Mercer sitting at the head of the table, radiating arrogance. His chin tilted high, his suit perfectly pressed, his expression carved into icy disdain. He was doing his best impression of Helios's all-powerful CEO, as though he hadn't been caught like a teenage boy groping his secretary in a fishbowl. His lawyer sat beside him, a jittery man with thinning hair and the kind of energy that screamed, middle of the class in law school, forever desperate to please. I slid into my chair opposite them, crossing my legs slowly, deliberately, as if I were settling in to watch a performance I already knew the ending to. The lawyer cleared his throat, already sweating. Mr. Mercer proposes. No need. Noah cut him off, his voice low, cold, self-satisfied. We divorce and split the assets straight down the middle. 50-50. Simple. Clean. I tilted my head, feigning consideration. Then my eyes flicked up to his face and I noticed it. Noah, I said sweetly like I was about to offer a compliment. Your nose hair is showing. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. The lawyer blinked rapidly, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Noah froze, his eyes widening just a fraction, his hand twitching toward his face. His lips thinned into a line as color flushed up his neck. What? I widened my eyes innocently, batting my lashes. I can't even tell the truth during a divorce. Besides, I leaned forward conspiratorially, my voice dropping into mock sincerity. Who told you to lift your chin that high? How else would I have seen it? The vein in his temple pulsed. I could practically see his blood pressure spiking. For a man who built his empire on polished appearances, nothing cut deeper than being reminded he was human. Mortal. Fallible. Worse, ridiculous. He inhaled sharply through his nose, chest heaving. Then, with an effort that looked painful, he forced his expression back into something resembling composure. Move it along, he snapped at his lawyer. I don't want this woman carrying my name for another second. I tapped my nail against the glossy surface of the table. There was his desperation. His need to cut ties fast before the stink of scandal stuck to him any longer than it had to. So I smiled, sweet as sugar, and dropped the bomb. I want 70% of the assets. The lawyer's head jerked up. Noah's eyes narrowed. I don't want stocks. I don't want Helios shares. I don't want cars or funds or investments tied up in your name. Just cash. And if there isn't enough cash on hand, real estate will do. The sound that came out of Noah's mouth was half laugh, half snarl. You're insane. 70%. You've lost your goddamn mind, Ava. He leaned forward, his eyes burning into me. You humiliate me in front of the board, you report me like some tattletale, and now you dare demand 70%? You think you can bleed me dry and walk away smiling? Why wouldn't I? My tone was light, conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. After all, what I reported was the truth, wasn't it? Or are you denying it? That shut him up. For once, Noah Mercer, master of negotiations, king of boardrooms, was choking on his own tongue. His face went red. His lawyer jumped in like a drowning man clutching for a rope. Ms. Hart, do you have any evidence of Mr. Mercer's supposed misconduct? His voice trembled with false bravado. And before you answer, let me be clear. If you say you secretly recorded anything, know that such material would be inadmissible. Not only that, but if it leaks, we'll pursue full legal action against you. On behalf of Mr. Mercer, I'll make sure of it. Noah regained his smugness just enough to smirk. Hear that, Ava? Maybe brush up on the law sometime. Might save you from embarrassing yourself. I let out a soft laugh, folding my hands neatly in front of me. Counselor, what nonsense. I'm a law-abiding citizen. Why would I ever secretly record anyone? I tilted my head. If there's any recording, it would be from Helios' own surveillance cameras. Noah's smirk faltered. His face twitched. The lawyer scrambled again, his voice higher now, too quick. Company surveillance is strictly confidential. It cannot be released externally, which means you have no usable evidence. I slid my hand into my bag, pulling out 2 neatly folded sheets of paper. Slowly, theatrically, I laid them flat on the table, smoothing the creases with deliberate care. Then I looked Noah in the eye and asked, in the sweetest tone I could muster, would the board's public self-criticism report, signed by Mr. Mercer himself, count as valid evidence? The lawyer went pale. Noah's fists clenched. I leaned back, folding my arms, my voice soft but razor-sharp. In black and white with your own signature, you admit to inappropriate workplace conduct. That's not just evidence. That's a confession. The silence that followed was delicious. Noah's jaw worked furiously, his eyes bloodshot with rage. He looked like he wanted to lunge across the table and strangle me. His lawyer, on the other hand, looked like he might faint. I gave them both a bright smile as if I'd just offered them tea and biscuits. Now, shall we discuss the division of assets again? The divorce certificate arrived in the mail exactly 1 month after I walked out of Carter and Sloan with Noah's signature inked beside mine. One thin piece of paper, but it was the heaviest relief I'd ever held. I slipped it into a drawer, poured myself a glass of champagne, and turned my attention to something far more important, the grand opening of my new store. Because if divorce was the closing of one chapter, then this was the opening of another, louder, brighter, and very much mine. I didn't just want an opening. I wanted a spectacle. So I made one. The morning of the launch, Aurora Plaza pulsed with energy. Bright red banners rippled in the breeze. A lion dance troupe thundered down the promenade, cymbals clashing, drums pounding. Firecrackers spat sparks into the sky. Music blasted from speakers as dancers spun and flipped across the stage I'd rented. I didn't stop there. Flash mobs burst from the crowd at intervals, their choreography snapping perfectly in sync. My store's name, Pulse Athletics, shone in bold chrome letters above the glass facade. Inside, mannequins in sleek activewear stood like guardians. Rows of yoga mats, resistance bands, boxing gloves, and cutting-edge equipment gleamed under the lights. But the real highlight? The runway show. I hired a dozen models, men and women who practically radiated health. Toned, tanned, glowing with that post-workout sheen. They strutted down the makeshift catwalk in leggings, sports bras, joggers, and tank tops, their movements fluid, their smiles bright. Some broke into impromptu aerobics routines. Others flexed to show off sculpted arms and abs. The crowd went wild. Phones shot into the air. Hashtags began trending. I didn't need to check to know Pulse Athletics was already making waves online. I stood at the entrance, calculating potential profits while clapping along, champagne flute in hand. Today wasn't just about selling products. It was about making a statement. I was free. I was thriving. I was untouchable. That's when I felt the gust. Cold, sharp like a warning. I stepped sideways just as a figure stumbled past me, nearly face-planting on the tiles. The woman straightened, spun, and jabbed a finger at me. Ava Hart. How dare you dodge me? Oh well. Speak of the devil. Noah's mother, I said, smiling warmly. Mrs. Mercer, do you work out too? I gave her a slow once-over. Though you might want to get your cerebellum checked first. You seem a little unsteady on your feet. Her face flushed purple. You shameless woman. My Noah supported you for 8 years and you drained him dry. Aren't you embarrassed to take so much from him? Embarrassed? I tilted my head, my tone all sincerity. Why would I be? Noah swore back when we first married that if he ever cheated, he'd leave with nothing. I didn't even take everything. I left him 20%. I'd say I was downright generous. I lowered my voice in mock concern. Or, are you worried his oath won't come true and he'll escape karma? Should I help him fulfill it and take the rest too? Her body trembled so violently I thought she might collapse. For a second I almost worried she'd faint and pin the blame on me. But Evelyn Mercer was tougher than a cockroach in nuclear winter. Instead of dropping, she lunged. Her hand whipped out, aiming to slap me across the face. But this was Pulse Athletics and I wasn't short on protection. Two of my tallest, broadest models stepped in front of me, chests flexed, arms folded. Human walls of muscle. Evelyn's fingers clawed at the air but she couldn't reach me. Her eyes blazed, her chest heaving. And then, like the petulant child she'd always been, she changed tactics. With a vicious kick, she struck the giant crystal statue stationed at my entrance. The crash was thunderous. The statue toppled, shattering into glittering shards that exploded across the pavement. The crowd gasped. And Evelyn dropped to the ground, wailing at the top of her lungs. Oh, why am I so unlucky? Look at this daughter-in-law. Shameless. My son supported her for years and she betrayed him, robbed him blind, and now she surrounds herself with pretty boys while I suffer. The performance was Oscar-worthy. I pulled out my phone. Hello, Gossip Weekly? I've got a scoop for you. Noah Mercer's mother is here at Aurora Plaza, shouting all kinds of things in public. The stuff she's saying is explosive. You'll want to hurry, 5 minutes tops. Her head snapped up. The wailing cut off mid-howl. I waved encouragingly. Go on, don't stop now. The reporters will love this. You nasty brat, she spat, scrambling to her feet with miraculous energy. You'll come to no good end. And then she bolted, sprinting away with the speed of a track star. So much for being unsteady on her feet. The crowd laughed nervously. I shook my head amused. What a miracle. Ill 1 second, sprinting the next. But my amusement soured when I saw the wreckage of the statue. That crystal wasn't some cheap decor. It was a whole piece of natural crystal carved by a master. 20 million worth of art, and she'd reduced it to rubble with one kick. That wasn't something I could let slide. So I called the police. At the station I sat across from Noah and his mother. 2 officers flanked us at the desk. One gestured for us to speak. Talk it over first. Noah's jaw clenched as he glared at me. Ava, do you really hate my mother this much? She's an old woman. I looked at him like he'd grown a second head. What does her age have to do with me? Being old doesn't give you the right to destroy property. She just accidentally knocked over a cheap glass statue, he snapped. Crystal, I corrected. Natural crystal. Whole piece. Rare. Valuable. I've already provided the store's surveillance footage. You saw it yourselves. I turned to the officers. It shows Mrs. Mercer deliberately kicking it, doesn't it? One officer nodded. Yes. The footage clearly shows intentional damage. Noah's face darkened but he pressed on. Fine. How much is it worth? I'll pay. Not much, I said casually. Just 20 million. The room went silent. Then Noah's eyes bulged. 20 million? Are you insane? Not even a ton of crystal is worth that. This isn't a ton, I replied evenly. It's one whole piece. Hand-carved. One of a kind. Priceless, really. I slid the receipt across the desk. But if you need proof, there it is. Signed, sealed. Noah snatched the paper, crumpling it in his fist. His knuckles whitened. You're insane, Ava. His voice came out like a hiss. You left something worth 20 million sitting outside your store like it was nothing. I arched an eyebrow. Since when do I need your permission to decide where to put my things? Besides, funny enough, you bought it for me this morning. You really should take better care of your gifts. The officer cleared his throat. 20 million is a serious amount. This constitutes the crime of intentionally destroying property. If no settlement is reached, it will proceed as a criminal case. Mrs. Mercer could face prison time. Noah stiffened. His mother whimpered beside him. I don't have that kind of money, he ground out. I rose, smoothing my suit. Then I suppose it's up to the prosecutors. Good luck. Wait. His voice cracked raw. I'll get you the money. Just sign the reconciliation. I looked down at him, expression cool. Transfer first. Or there's nothing to talk about. His eyes went bloodshot, his chest heaving. For a moment I thought he might actually lunge at me. But then he pulled out his phone, fingers trembling. 30 minutes later, 20 million hit my account. Only then did I sign the paperwork. Evelyn was released from holding, looking like she'd aged 10 years in 3 hours. She threw herself into Noah's arms, sobbing. I offered her a polite smile. Mrs. Mercer, you're not young anymore. Don't let impulse control you. Impulse is the devil. She shrieked louder, calling me cursed, shameless, vicious. I just shrugged, collected my bag and walked out. Because for me it wasn't just about the 20 million. It was about principle. And the principle was simple. Cross me and you'll pay in full. I thought the 20 million crystal incident would buy me a brief reprieve from the Mercer family's meddling. Surely, after paying such a hefty price, they'd learn to keep their distance. But I should have known better. If Evelyn Mercer was the fist, blunt and clumsy, then Harold Mercer, Noah's father, was the knife. He never raised his voice, never made a scene. He preferred to cut quietly, leaving wounds that bled long after the blade was gone. He arrived at my store 3 weeks after the grand opening. I was on the mezzanine level of Pulse Athletics, going over sales reports with my manager, when the staff whispered urgently that an older gentleman was downstairs asking for me. When I descended, I saw him standing near the entrance, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture as stiff as the iron rod he'd surely swallowed as a child. Harold Mercer looked every inch the patriarch he fancied himself to be. Crisp linen shirt, dark trousers, his thinning hair carefully combed back. His expression was carved into disdain, as though my store, my staff, my customers, all of it was beneath him. "Mr. Mercer," I greeted, deliberately formal. "Here to work out?" His face twitched. He had been a village teacher once, back in the days before Noah struck gold. He used to revel in being called Mr. Mercer, as if the honorific elevated him above the rest of the town. But since Noah's rise, people had taken to calling him Sir or Teacher, indulging his pretensions of refinement. I watched the flicker of confusion in his eyes before it hardened into irritation. "Ava," he said, his tone clipped, "a woman holding company shares is useless. Transfer them to Noah. He will know how to manage them. Straight to the point. No small talk, no pretense. Just an order, as if I were still his obedient daughter-in-law and not the woman who had walked away with 80% of Noah's assets." I tilted my head, studying him. He hadn't even bothered to mask his arrogance. He was used to people bowing when he spoke, used to his word being law. But I wasn't that woman anymore. "You're right," I said, nodding earnestly. "A woman like me has no use for shares." His eyes lit up, his lips twitching into a smug smile. He thought he'd won. What he didn't realize was that while our end goals aligned, me getting rid of the shares, our methods were very different. The moment Harold left my store, I pulled out my phone and fired off a message to my contacts. "Shares for sale. First come, first served." My block of Helios Dynamics shares wasn't just pocket change. They were original shares acquired back when Noah and I had built the company from the ground up. And with Helios on the cusp of going public, those shares were pure gold. I didn't have to wait long. Within an hour, calls flooded in. Shareholders, investors, speculators, they all wanted a piece. Everyone knew that a chunk of original stock this size could shift control. By the time Noah got wind of it, I had already spoken to half a dozen interested buyers. He stormed into my office, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. "Ava, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I blinked at him, feigning innocence. "Selling shares. What else could I be doing?" "You told my father you'd transfer them to me," he snapped. I raised my brows. "Did I? I only said I didn't want the shares. What part of that sounded like I was giving them to you for free?" His mouth opened, then shut again. He actually looked like a fish gasping on dry land. "Adam," I caught myself smirking. "Sorry, Noah. Are you so broke you're hallucinating? Dreaming of getting original shares for nothing? You better see a doctor. Don't worry, I'll cover the bill. Out of respect for our former marriage, of course." The vein in his forehead twitched. He looked like he couldn't decide whether to strangle me or fall to his knees. And then his phone buzzed. One call. Then another. Then another. Every shareholder I'd spoken to was circling like a shark, ready to buy. Ready to wrest control away from him. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs. "You can buy them too, you know. You're a shareholder. Nothing's stopping you." His glare could have burned a hole through me. But then he ground out, "Fine. I'll buy them." "Perfect." I smiled sweetly. "Let's talk price." The bargaining was brutal. Helios was in its final stages before going public, which meant original shares were at peak value. The moment I announced I was selling, demand exploded. One investor offered double the original price. Another upped the ante. The numbers climbed higher and higher. I didn't have to lift a finger. The market did the work for me. Noah was desperate. He couldn't let those shares fall into someone else's hands. Helios was his baby, his empire. Losing control now would crush him. So he bid. Higher and higher until his face turned ashen, his eyes hollow, his knuckles white around his phone. Finally, he gave me a number that made me smile. Done, I said lightly. Money first, then the contract. When he handed me the check, his grip was so tight I thought the paper might tear. His voice cracked as he rasped, "Ava, we were married once. Do you really have to be this ruthless?" I frowned, genuinely puzzled. What's ruthless about a normal business transaction? You pay, I sell. That's how markets work. His eyes blazed. My father already went to see you. Oh, right. I pretended to think. I almost forgot. Do me a favor, Noah. Tell your creepy old relatives to stop coming near me. I'm impulsive. When someone pushes me, I act without thinking. Just like with these shares. If I'd been in the wrong mood, I might have given them to someone else entirely. I yanked the check from his hand and waved it in front of him. Doesn't that sting? All that money out of your pocket, gone in seconds. Let this be a lesson. Don't send your family to order me around again. I blew him a kiss, swayed my hips and walked out, leaving him standing there trembling with rage. That night I asked my lawyer to dig into the source of Noah's funds. He got back to me within the hour. Miss Hart, Mr. Mercer sold an apartment. He paid for it himself, but it was under Miss Kayla Lynn's name. That's how he raised the money. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my wine. Of course Noah had hidden assets. Of course he had funneled property under his mistress's name. But now, he'd bled himself dry buying back the very shares I no longer wanted. It was poetic, really. The apartment was worth tens of millions, sure. But the shares I'd sold him? They were barely worth as much as the crystal statue his mother had destroyed. And just like that, the Mercers had managed to trap themselves in another perfect loop. They schemed. I profited. I collected. And I was only just getting started. I used to think walking away from Helios Dynamics meant giving up my influence. That without my executive title, without being Mrs. Mercer, the doors to the city's inner circles would slam shut in my face. But I underestimated myself. And I underestimated women. You see, when men build empires, they think of steel and glass and money. When women build empires, we think of people. And I had plenty. Back when Noah still tolerated me as his wife, he used to sneer at the ladies' circles I entertained myself with. He called them frivolous, empty. He never realized those lunches, teas and galas weren't just gossip. They were currency. So after the divorce I doubled down. With Mrs. Chin by my side, we co-founded Glamour Unlimited, a charity foundation that on paper supported underprivileged students and disaster relief, but in practice did much more. It cemented my place as a woman who mattered. When a typhoon hit the southern coast, our foundation raised millions overnight. When schools in rural provinces lacked supplies, our name appeared on every donated box. And of course, every receipt we issued meant generous tax deductions for the companies whose wives filled our membership roster. Men love money. Women love security. I gave them both. So when the monthly luncheon rolled around, hosted as always at Mrs. Chen's exclusive club, I didn't walk in as an outsider. I walked in as a leader. Mrs. Chen and I arrived 10 minutes late that day. Not intentionally. Our conversation over tea had run long, but it might as well have been scripted. The moment we stepped into the private dining hall, every head turned. The regular members, women draped in diamonds, silk scarves tossed carelessly over manicured shoulders, smiled in greeting. But clustered at the far end of the room were the newcomers. Fresh faces, eager and nervous, clinging together for safety like ducklings. And at the center of them sat a woman whose face I would have forgotten if not for the body I'd once caught pressed against my husband's. Evelyn. I almost laughed aloud. Of course she would try to claw her way into this circle. She'd gone from secretary to mistress to ostensible girlfriend. But no matter how many apartments Noah sold or how many lies he told, she'd never stop being what she was, the other woman. Still she played her role well. Chin tilted just so, voice pitched theatrically loud, she answered a question from one of the newcomers. Yes, I did sell my apartment to help Noah through a crisis, she said, sighing with the patience of a saint. But it's only temporary. With his ability, once Helios goes public, he'll earn it all back. What's his is bound to be his sooner or later. The women around her cooed in admiration. Jiao Jiao, you're so wonderful to stand by Mr. Mercer during hard times. He's lucky to have you. Kayla's eyes slid across the room and landed on me. Her lips curled into a smile as sweet as arsenic. A person should have a conscience, she said, her voice dripping with fake virtue. I, for one, would never leave a man at his lowest. Not like some people who enjoyed years of luxury only to end a marriage by digging 3 feet into the ground, taking even the last drop of his hard-earned money. The air shifted. Conversations stilled. Heads turned. Her meaning couldn't have been clearer if she'd stood up and pointed at me. For a moment I said nothing. I could have fired back. I could have ripped her to shreds with a single sentence. But sometimes silence is louder than words. I just smiled, looped my arm through Mrs. Chen's and moved to take my seat. But Mrs. Chen wasn't having it. With a sharp motion, she snatched the nearest crystal glass off the table and hurled it at Kayla's feet. The glass exploded, shards scattering across the polished floor. Gasps rang out. Kayla flinched, her face paling. And Mrs. Chen, fierce, unapologetic Mrs. Chen, pointed a manicured finger straight at her. You sold a house? She barked. You little girl, you've barely been out of college 2 years. Where did you get 10 million to buy a villa? Don't you know in your own heart whose money paid for it? Kayla's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. I've seen shameless before, Mrs. Chen went on, her voice cutting through the room like a whip. But not this shameless. Playing the mistress and still acting like it's some badge of honor. And worse, helping hide marital assets for him. Do you think we don't all see through you? By the time she finished, Kayla's face had gone completely white. The other women shifted uneasily. Some stared at Kayla with open disgust. Others looked at me, their gazes softening. Because the truth was, Kayla had overplayed her hand. She thought painting me as an ungrateful wife would win her sympathy. Instead, she'd exposed herself, blurted out what she should have kept hidden. That she'd been a pawn in hiding Noah's assets. Mrs. Chen flicked her wrist at the club manager who had been hovering nearby. That one, she said coldly, nodding at Kayla, and those with her. Print their photos. Stick them on the front door. Make sure everyone knows who they are. They're not allowed to step foot in this club again. The manager's polite smile didn't waver as he moved to obey. Kayla's entourage panicked, their faces draining of color. A couple of them tried to plead, but Mrs. Chen silenced them with a glare. Within minutes, the manager had ushered them out, their expensive heels clicking in hurried retreat. And just like that, Kayla Lin, Noah's precious mistress, was banned. The room exhaled. I turned to Mrs. Chen, laughter bubbling up. Sis, you really are my ultimate mouthpiece. She grinned, lifting her glass. And you, Ava, really do know how to pick your allies. We clinked glasses and the luncheon resumed, the whispers already shifting in my favor. By the time dessert was served, the story wasn't about Ava Hart, the greedy ex-wife. It was about Kayla Lin, the shameless mistress exposed and expelled. Later that evening, I sat in a lavender-scented bath, phone in hand, scrolling through the group chat of our circle. Messages poured in. Ava, you handled yourself with such grace. Mrs. Chen is a goddess. Kayla deserved worse. You've set an example for all of us. No wonder Glamour Unlimited thrives. I smiled, sipping my wine. Because today wasn't just about humiliating Kayla. It was about proving something bigger. That even divorced, even without Noah's name, I wasn't falling. I was rising. And the higher I rose, the harder they would all fall. I've always believed that revenge is not about speed. It's about precision. A blunt strike leaves bruises. A precise one severs arteries. After the luncheon debacle, after Kayla Lin was marched out of Mrs. Chen's club like a disgraced debutante, I should have felt satisfied. And I was, for a time. But satisfaction is fleeting. I didn't just want Kayla silenced. I wanted Noah himself to bleed. And fate, as if eager to conspire with me, handed me the perfect knife. It began with a receipt. A 20 million receipt to be exact. The one Noah had produced in under 30 minutes to cover the crystal statue his mother destroyed. I hadn't thought much of it at first. Noah was rich after all. He could conjure money when needed. But later that night as I lay in bed, something gnawed at me. The speed. The ease. He hadn't even flinched before transferring the amount. I frowned at the ceiling. Helios was preparing for its IPO. Every cent of its finances should have been accounted for, every dollar scrutinized. Noah wasn't supposed to have that much liquidity lying around. So where had it come from? I called my lawyer the next morning. Dig, I instructed him. Quietly. I want to know where Noah pulled 20 million from. He didn't disappoint. A week later he placed a folder on my desk, his expression grim. Miss Hart, he said, your ex-husband has been funneling money through one of Helios' suppliers. My brows rose. Which supplier? A small logistics company registered under the name of Kayla Lynn's mother. I laughed so suddenly I nearly choked. Of course. The report was damning. The company was nothing but a shell. No history, no staff, no assets. Every contract it received from Helios had been subcontracted out to actual providers. And yet invoices were bloated, costs inflated. The excess? Funneled neatly into the Mercers' pockets. It was genius in its simplicity, and idiotic in its execution. Did the board know? I asked. Not yet, my lawyer said. Noah disguised the figures in quarterly reports. On the surface, profits still looked healthy. I tapped the folder, smiling coldly. Then it's time they knew. The day I submitted the dossier to Helios board, the room was electric. The directors, men who usually spoke in bored monotones, their attention divided between their phones and their egos, were suddenly wide awake. Pages rustled, whispers hissed. At the end of the table, Noah sat rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. This is slander, he snapped. Fabricated. But the evidence was too thorough. Copies of invoices, bank transfers, subcontractor statements. The final nail, a signature from Kayla's mother herself. The chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Mercer, the company is preparing for an IPO. Transparency is non-negotiable. This kind of operational loophole, he shook his head. It cannot be tolerated. They forced Noah to repay every cent. Tens of millions clawed back. His pride shredded in front of the very men whose respect he once commanded. Me. I sat in the corner, silent, serene, watching the empire he'd built crumble brick by brick. That night my phone rang. Ava. His voice was raw, ragged. I stretched on my velvet sofa, swirling a glass of wine. Yes. It was you, he spat. You reported me to the board. Me. I let my voice drip with innocence. Why would you think that? Don't play games, he snarled. You've been gunning for me since the divorce. Admit it. I set my glass down, letting the pause stretch. Then I said, clear and unapologetic, yes, it was me. And it was a damn good job, wasn't it? His breathing turned uneven, heavy. I never treated you badly, he growled. Why would you do this? I almost laughed. Never treated me badly? Noah, everything I have now I fought for myself. If I'd been weak, I'd be on the streets. You think throwing scraps my way counts as kindness? You made your bed. Lie in it. Ava. His voice broke into a roar. Don't regret this. Oh, I'm terrified, I said, patting my chest theatrically even though he couldn't see me. Quaking in my heels. He cursed, words tumbling incoherently before the line went dead. I leaned back against the cushions, smiling. Noah Mercer had just realized the truth. I wasn't his wife anymore. I wasn't his support. I was his enemy. And I intended to be the kind he could never defeat. I've always believed that pride is a man's most fragile possession. You can take his money, his house, his company, but strip him of his dignity in public and you've gutted him. Noah Mercer lived for dignity. For appearances. For the polished illusion of control. So of course I chose to make that illusion crumble exactly where it mattered most. In the spotlight. The invitation arrived gilded in silver, embossed with the Helios Dynamics logo. An exclusive pre-IPO gala, the card proclaimed. A celebration of Noah's so-called vision. Once I would have been proud to stand at his side. Once I would have spent days planning the perfect gown, the perfect smile, rehearsing how to nod gracefully when investors whispered that we were the city's golden couple. But those days were gone. Now I attended as something sharper. An ex-wife with nothing to lose and everything to enjoy. The ballroom glittered that evening. Chandeliers spilled light like waterfalls. Waiters in white gloves floated by with trays of champagne. The air buzzed with the hum of money. Investors, bankers, politicians, all gathered to witness Helios' ascent. Noah swept into the room like a king returning to his throne. He wore confidence like a second suit, shoulders back, chin tilted high. Kayla clung to his arm in a gown too low to be tasteful, diamonds flashing at her throat. They preened, soaking in the attention. I sipped my drink in the corner, amused. He spotted me quickly, of course. His pride wouldn't allow him not to. Olivia. He caught himself, then corrected with a sneer. Ava. He approached, chest puffed. Do you regret it? The words were practically vibrating on his lips, rehearsed 100 times in the mirror. He wanted me to say yes. To admit that leaving him, selling my shares, exposing his corruption, all of it had been a mistake. He wanted to see me small again. I looked up at him slowly, deliberately. He was taller, and with his chin tipped up like that I had to crane my neck. So I said, sweet as honey, your nose hair is showing. For one perfect second, silence blanketed the ballroom. Then the laughter came. It started as a ripple, a chuckle from someone who couldn't contain themselves. Then it spread like fire through dry grass. Stifled giggles turned into roaring guffaws. Champagne sloshed from glasses. Men doubled over, women covered painted lips, eyes glittering with schadenfreude. Noah's nose hair, someone whispered too loudly. Did you see? His face went from smug to scarlet to a shade so dark it was nearly black. He lived for control, for admiration. And here he was, reduced to a punchline, the joke of the night, by the very woman he wanted to humiliate. He glared at me, seething. Ava, how can you be so low class now? I widened my eyes innocently. Low class? I was just telling the truth. You're the one holding your head so high. How else would I have seen it? He choked on rage. And then, with his dignity in tatters, he stormed off, Kayla trailing behind him, her smile brittle. The air felt cleaner the moment they left. But the night wasn't over. A week later, the Radiance Collective hosted its annual gala, a night of gowns and champagne, but also of generosity. The city's wealthiest came ready to flaunt both their jewels and their philanthropy. I wore crimson that night. Not the gentle blush of roses, but the sharp red of a blade. The highlight of the evening was the charity auction. Paintings, sculptures, rare wines, jewels, each item paraded before eager bidders. Proceeds went to scholarships and disaster relief, a cause no one could refuse. And who should waltz in hand but Noah and Kayla? They weren't subtle. He spent the evening preening, his hand never leaving her waist. She simpered, leaning into him as if they were Romeo and Juliet reborn. The whispers were deafening. Everyone knew their history. Everyone knew what they had done. And still he paraded her here, desperate to make me watch. I didn't flinch. Because I'd already laid the trap. When the final item appeared, a diamond necklace sparkling under the lights, I saw Noah stiffen. His moment. His grand performance. The auctioneer began. We'll start at 5 million. Bids shot up. 6, 7, 8. Noah's hand lifted confidently. 10. The crowd murmured approval. He was showing off, proving his wealth, his devotion. Another bidder countered. 11. Noah smirked. 15. The audience clapped. Kayla pressed a hand to her chest, eyes shining with fake tears. What Noah didn't know was that the man bidding against him worked for me. So did the woman who chimed in at 16 and the couple who raised it to 17. I'd seeded the room with bidders, each ready to push the price higher. 20 million, Noah declared at last, his voice ringing out triumphant. Silence fell. No one countered. The gavel dropped. Sold. The room erupted in applause. Noah rose, taking the necklace in trembling hands. With exaggerated tenderness he clasped it around Kayla's neck. To my beloved, he announced, his voice thick with staged affection. The cameras flashed. The whispers hissed. And every eye turned to me. They wanted to see me break. To see the scorned ex-wife crushed by this performance of devotion. I only smiled, swirling the wine in my glass. As I knew the truth. He hadn't just bought her a necklace. He'd bought himself ruin. Later Mrs. Chin leaned close, eyes dancing. You arranged that, didn't you? I feigned innocence. Arranged what? Her laughter rang out. You lined up the bidders. You pushed him to 20 million. I gave her a mock-serious look. Mrs. Chin, this is a charity auction. Backing out would be fraud. And fraud? Well, that leads to prison, doesn't it? She nearly choked on her champagne. Oh, Ava. Rotten fish and stinking shrimp should only ever wear fakes. You're brilliant. Around us, people were buzzing. Some pitied me. Poor Ava, her ex flaunting his new love with diamonds. Others admired me. Ava hasn't blinked once. What composure. And a select few, those sharp enough to notice the gleam in my eyes, realized I had orchestrated the whole thing. By the end of the night, Noah thought he had humiliated me. In reality, I had humiliated him. Because when the papers printed the next day, they didn't talk about Helios IPO. They talked about Nose Hair Noah and Marbled Pork Gala, nicknames born of ridicule. The city had its gossip. I had my revenge. Noah had a diamond necklace worth 20 million that bled his liquidity dry, and not a shred of dignity left to his name. Revenge is like wine. You don't gulp it. You sip it slowly, savoring the notes as they unfold on the tongue. And by the time Noah Mercer realized what I had poured for him, it was already too late. The morning after the charity gala, when Noah basked in the fleeting glow of his $20 million necklace stunt, I set the final piece of my plan in motion. I made one phone call. Everything's ready? I asked. Ready, came the reply. Then start. Flood all channels. Profit doesn't matter. Grab the market first. Losses can be covered with the marketing budget. Don't worry, I'll cover it. And just like that, a new product stormed onto the market. It looked almost ordinary at first glance. A piece of consumer tech that overlapped heavily with Helios Dynamics' flagship line. But it was sleeker, faster, easier to use, more convenient, and most importantly, cheaper. 2/3 the price of Helios product with better performance. The effect was immediate. Within days, my product seized half the market. Within weeks, its trajectory was unstoppable. Helios scrambled. They slashed prices, desperate to compete. But their desperation backfired. Customers began whispering that if they could drop prices so suddenly, maybe their product had always been overpriced. Maybe the quality wasn't as good as they claimed. Helios' brand, once untouchable, was tarnished. Noah? He watched the empire he'd built wither before his eyes. A dying camel is still bigger than a horse. For a time, Helios staggered forward, leaning on loyal customers and investors. But cracks widened. Every investor meeting brought more hesitation. Every press conference came with tighter smiles and colder questions. The IPO date, once trumpeted with confidence, was delayed again and again. Behind closed doors, institutions whispered about pulling out. Some already had. And then, like a toppled domino line, it all collapsed. Helios Dynamics, the pride of Noah Mercer's career, was no longer a rising star. It was a sinking ship. He called me 10 days after the collapse began. Meet me, he rasped. Just once. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Not out of pity. Not out of lingering affection. But because I wanted to see it. The final unraveling. The cafe we chose was nothing special. Small, ordinary. A far cry from the marble boardrooms where he once ruled. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. Noah had always carried himself with swagger, his confidence smoothing over the edges of his age. But now, his shoulders sagged. His skin was sallow. Deep lines carved his face. He looked like a man decades older than he was. He tried to straighten when he saw me, but the effort was pitiful. It was you, he croaked, voice cracking. You funded the rival product. I slid into the chair opposite him, crossing my legs with deliberate elegance. Yes, the capital behind it is mine. His hands trembled as he clenched them on the table. Why? Do you really want to destroy me this badly? I tapped the wooden surface twice with a single finger, signaling him to calm down. Noah, you give yourself too much credit. He flinched. Stop pretending. You just want revenge, don't you? I studied him for a moment, then sighed. Once I had loved him. I had loved his drive, his ambition, his hunger for the future. But somewhere along the way he had fossilized, content to sit on his throne while I kept shrinking myself to fit his shadow. Noah, I said quietly, I didn't destroy you. Time did. Innovation did. You stood still while the world kept moving. My product was the future. Yours was the past. Whether I lifted a finger or not, Helios was doomed. His eyes glistened with a desperation that made him almost unrecognizable. If you hadn't pushed, it wouldn't have happened so fast. I smiled, soft and merciless. Why shouldn't I push? Did I not warn you? Don't let those snakes and clowns around you come near me. But you not only failed to protect me, you brought them to my door. You spat on my dignity. You paraded your mistress in my face. You trampled on my pride. And now you ask why I pushed. His lips parted, but no words came out. You trampled my pride, he finally whispered. You could have trampled mine alone. But why everything else? I leaned forward, voice low, deliberate. Because revenge, Noah, must escalate. Otherwise it's not revenge, it's just a slap. And you deserved far more than a slap. His shoulders collapsed inward, folding like a withered stalk. His face turned ashen, his eyes vacant. And in that moment I knew it was over. I stood, setting a few bills on the table for my coffee. Noah Mercer, I said softly, we've reached the end. He didn't look up. He didn't speak. He just sat there, a hollow man in a small cafe, surrounded by the ashes of what used to be his kingdom. As I walked out, sunlight spilled across the pavement. My heels clicked against the tiles, steady, unhurried. I thought of everything I'd heard lately. His mother hospitalized from stress, his father humiliated and aging fast, Gala threatening yo leave the moment the money dried up. Helios shareholders pressing for accountability, investors vanishing like smoke. But none of it touched me anymore. Once I might have carried his burdens. Once I might have fought to patch his world together. But I no longer loved Noah. And without love, there was nothing left but justice. My kind of justice. The end.